Last week, I found myself sitting across from a senior director at one of the country's leading engineering firms. We were discussing the recent localized failures in the regional power grid, and I expected to hear a technical post-mortem on load balancing or aging transformers. Instead, her eyes lit up with a peculiar, almost frantic enthusiasm as she showed me a series of slides on her tablet. They weren't schematics or maintenance schedules. They were cultural alignment maps, elaborate, colorful diagrams detailing the department's latest administrative milestones and ideological compliance benchmarks. This, she said, tapping the screen with a sense of profound triumph, is how we're truly modernizing. This is the real work. She spoke about the physical infrastructure as if it were a secondary, almost annoying distraction from the grander project of institutional transformation. The tone was calm, celebratory, and entirely detached from the reality of the blackouts. But then, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. A news alert flashed on the monitor behind her. A major substation had just suffered a catastrophic failure, plunging another 3 districts into darkness. In that moment, the giddy excitement vanished, replaced not by professional urgency, but by a look of sheer, helpless vacancy. She didn't reach for a technical manual or call the head of maintenance. She checked the PR response protocols. It was as if the magnetic north of her entire profession had simply ceased to exist, leaving only the performance of authority without any of its substance. That jarring disconnect, the total triumph of the administrative image over a crumbling physical reality, is more than just a corporate glitch. It is a clinical symptom of what some are calling a civilizational winter. We are witnessing a pattern pathology where the operating system of competence, meritocracy, is being systematically overwritten by a new, hollow bureaucracy. When the people holding the compass no longer believe in the concept of north, we have to ask, what happens when the technical debt of our civilization finally comes due to?
Wow. And that specific moment you described, that shift from the giddy pride and the cultural alignment map to just instantly checking the PR protocol after a real disaster.
Instantly.
No hesitation.
That perfectly encapsulates the core structural pathology we're going to analyze in this deep dive. Our mission, really, is to understand this crisis of competence.
It feels like a crisis.
It is. We need to analyze this systemic replacement of actual functional expertise with administrative image, how compliance and bureaucracy are basically hollowing out institutions from the inside.
And at the same time, we have to look at how society responds to that decay.
Right, because they do respond. They construct these elaborate external mechanisms, media spectacles, powerful identity narratives, these carefully curated national brands.
So the performance becomes the product.
That's it exactly. And we have material here that frames this from so many angles, from academic critiques of modern work, especially what the late David Graeber called bullshit jobs.
A term that hits home for a lot of people.
It does. And we'll also get into geopolitical analysis of how nations are, literally imagined into being through mass media just to keep collective belief in the system afloat. It's a deep dive into what happens when the show is all that's left.
Okay, let's unpack that internal conflict first. This idea of administrative bloat that makes real functional work feel like an annoying distraction.
Yes.
The idea that this operating system of competence is being overwritten. Mm-hmm. It really finds its strongest critical voice in the work of David Graeber. His perspective is, I think, especially valuable because his own life was a kind of case study.
It really was. You can't separate the man from the theory. Graeber's whole framework was so deeply rooted in this critical look at labor and power, and that came directly from his family history.
His mother, right?
His mother, Ruth Rubenstein. She was the daughter of Polish Jewish immigrants who came over during the Great Depression. She had to leave college to work in a garment factory.
So she was on the front lines of industrial labor.
Absolutely. And crucially, she was incredibly active in the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. She even performed in their famous comedy show, Pins and Needles.
Which was a huge Broadway hit, wasn't it?
A massive hit. But here's the key part. After the show's run, she went right back to the factory floor. This is so important for understanding Graeber. His mother was intellectually brilliant, deeply political, but also completely immersed in the world of real, functional, physical work.
So he had this This visceral understanding of how institutions work and who gets valued from a very young age.
Exactly. He saw the disconnect between a value and reward firsthand. And that brings us to his academic journey at Yale, which is just a chilling, high-stakes example of the exact pathology he would later describe. He wasn't just observing institutional failure from afar, he was living it.
He was. I mean, he joins Yale's anthropology department in 1998. He's publishing respected, high-quality scholarship. And then what happens?
Then in 2005, the department just chooses not to renew his contract, which effectively blocked him from even being considered for academic tenure.
And this was hugely controversial at the time.
Oh, massively. His scholarly merit wasn't really in question. He had academic giants in his corner, Marshall Salins, Laura Nader, Maurice Bloch, all arguing for him. But the administrative decision was final.
So what was the reason? Or what was the reason everyone thought it was?
Well, the prevailing argument among his supporters was that the decision was political. It was driven by his very high-profile activism, his involvement in the anti-World Economic Forum protests, the UK student movements.
So in an elite institution supposedly dedicated to scholarly merit, the administrative arm steps in and says, your functional excellence is irrelevant if your political alignment is inconvenient for us.
That's it. It's the director choosing the cultural map over the transformer schematics, just on an academic level.
The performance over the substance.
Precisely. His own experience was a personal demonstration of how administrative control, driven by concerns over image or political compliance, could just systematically override the meritocratic process. And that visceral conflict is what led him to formalize what he was seeing everywhere, across the entire white-collar world. The bullshit job phenomenon.
Let's really detail that concept, because I think people hear the term and they just think it means a boring or a bad job. But it's so much more than that. It's a structural critique.
It's a deep structural critique. A bullshit job, as Graeber defined it, is a form of paid employment that is so completely pointless, so unnecessary, or even pernicious,
that the employee themselves can't even justify it.
Can't even secretly justify its existence.
Yeah.
That's the key. And these aren't just low-paid, awful jobs. Often, they're relatively high-status, comfortable positions in an office.
And he had categories for them.
He did. There are the flunkies, who basically exist just to make their superiors feel important, like an admin assistant whose main job is to screen calls that don't need screening.
Then you have the box tickers.
Yes. The people who spend all day filling out paperwork or creating reports that serve no purpose other than to say the paperwork was filled out. It's performative compliance. And then my favorite, the taskmasters.
The ones who manage people who don't need managing.
Or who just invent more unnecessary tasks for others to do. It's a self-perpetuating cycle of pointlessness.
And the key is that profound psychological damage. That feeling of, utter purposelessness that comes from knowing your life's work contributes absolutely nothing tangible to human existence.
That cognitive dissonance is the core of it. You're highly educated, you're probably in massive debt for that education, and yet you're spending 8 hours a day managing spreadsheets that no one will ever read, or attending meetings that exist only to schedule more meetings.
And this proliferation, it directly contributes to that erosion of technical excellence we started with.
Directly. Because it shifts the entire focus of what is considered valuable work. Real, functional expertise, the kind of competence you need to keep a bridge from collapsing or a power grid online, is systematically replaced by these endless layers of managerial surveillance, pointless reporting, and ideological compliance checks.
That director, at the beginning, her real work had become managing the administrative image, not the power grid.
Exactly. But this decay, it isn't coming from just one place. The underlying structural failure seems to have two very distinct, almost competing explanations for why this is happening.
Well, let's look at the first one, the financial critique. If all these bullshit jobs and all this institutional bloat are so inefficient, why doesn't the free market just correct it?
Well, the financialization critique argues that the market is correcting, but in a really violent way that actually destroys long-term expertise. This view says that the big shift towards, marketization and hyperfinancialization.
Shareholder value above all else.
Above everything. It's made investing in deep, long-term competence wildly unattractive. We're in an economic environment where there's often a falling rate of profit, meaning it's really hard for firms to grow organically through actual production.
So instead of investing in, say, better technology or more skilled workers for the long haul, they just extract value immediately.
Precisely. They resort to what you could call financial malpractice. This means systematically underinvesting in core infrastructure, in maintenance, in training programs, in R&D,
And where does that capital go instead?
Stock buybacks.
Yeah.
Aggressive stock buybacks that artificially inflate the share price in the short term, which rewards executives and short-term investors. And you see the direct outcome of this in critical sectors.
Like the examples you see in the news connecting infrastructure, failure to very specific cost-cutting measures.
Think about the railways. This critique points to very specific metrics, like reducing the number of safety inspectors per rail car, or shortening the time allowed for complex safety checks, or just postponing necessary track upgrades for years.
The savings look great on a quarterly report.
They look fantastic, but the casualty is long-term technical reliability, which, inevitably leads to a catastrophic failure down the line. And beyond that, this profit-driven environment just annihilates professional loyalty.
Because there's no incentive to stay.
None. If the system rewards you for job hopping every 2 years with a 30% income bump, but it penalizes the professional who stays for a decade to actually master a niche, complex skill set, then the system is actively disincentivizing the very creation of competence. Financial pressure makes deep expertise fiscally irrational.
That's a really powerful argument, and it's centered purely on the profit motive. But there's this other, almost opposing critique that says this isn't about maximizing returns at all. It's about prioritizing administrative and ideological alignment, even if it costs the company money.
And this is the second major driver of decay, the ideological or administrative critique. This view argues that the core issue is the systematic promotion of the unqualified and the sidelining of the competent. By prioritizing something like ideological equity or just administrative compliance over established meritocratic standards.
So the argument is that we had a period of meritocracy and now that's being dismantled.
The belief is that, from roughly the 1920s through the 1960s, meritocratic evaluation became the norm in specialized fields. You were judged on your ability to actually do the job. And now, allegedly, that norm is being taken apart piece by piece.
And what's the mechanism? How is this enforced administratively?
Well, let's look at a specific tool, like slating guidelines. These are hiring rules, often presented as diversity best practices, that mandate that for every single job opening, the hiring committee has to interview or slate a certain number or type of diverse candidates.
Which on the surface sounds fair.
On the surface. But in highly specialized, high-stakes fields, we're talking senior engineering, specialized medicine, policing, there often just aren't enough highly qualified, highly specialized candidates from specific demographic groups to consistently meet these rigid quota requirements for every single opening.
So the institution gets stuck. It has to meet the quota, but it can't find the talent pool that meets both the quota and the existing technical standard. So which variable is easiest for the institution to change?
It's always the standard. It becomes structurally necessary for institutions that use these strict quotas to continually reduce their technical requirements just to keep the hiring pipeline moving and meet the mandate.
Do we see this happening in the real world?
Acutely. Look at sectors that are struggling with recruitment, like Canadian police forces. Year after year, they've had to reduce the requirements. Less intense psychological evaluations, lower educational requirements. In Ontario, they even remove the requirement for any post-secondary education and alternative physical standards.
So the explicit goal of meeting a demographic quota, when you use a rigid tool like a slating guideline, necessitates a tangible reduction in the technical standards of entry.
It's a structural failure in the evaluation process itself. The process of hiring becomes more important than the outcome of hiring a competent person.
And this creates a feedback loop that must inevitably impact those high-stakes sectors, where technical excellence is literally a life-or-death matter.
It absolutely does. Look at the health sector. There's a deeply unsettling critique coming out now about newer cohorts of nurses, for example. They're sometimes described as being hyper-incompetent.
What does that mean in practice?
It means exhibiting paralysis, a sort of deer-in-the-headlights response during unexpected high-pressure situations. This, despite the fact that modern medicine is getting more and more complex every year.
And where's this coming from?
The argument is that it's a systemic failure in the curriculum itself, that the required curriculum has become, to put it bluntly, garbage. It focuses too much on years of abstract nursing theory or bullshit, and not enough on actual hard science, anatomy, or practical medical skills.
So the curriculum is very easy, as some sources claim, and it's just not keeping pace with the demands of the job.
Exactly. So when you combine these two big critiques, the profit motive forcing underinvestment on one hand, and the compliance motive forcing the reduction of standards on the other, you arrive at the exact same destination.
A systemic erosion of technical excellence in our most critical sectors: engineering, aviation, medicine.
Yes. The path is different, but the result is the same, a profound loss of institutional competence. And that synthesis brings us directly to this concept of institutional capture.
Where the fundamental purpose of the organization is no longer defined by its core mission.
It's defined by these internal administrative or financial pressures. And this isn't just about hiring anymore. It's about a fundamental betrayal of that mission. When that power utility director decides that cultural alignment maps are the real work and keeping the lights on is an annoying distraction, that institution has been captured.
That shift in the compass, as you put it, is the symptom.
It is. When the administrative bloat takes over, the organization's focus shifts radically. The mission, whether it's teaching kids, building a safe bridge, or caring for patients, it just gets superseded by these internal metrics of compliance, of image control, of reporting cycles designed to manage perception rather than reality. The actual expertise is devalued.
Let's go back to that director. What exactly do those cultural alignment maps represent in the context of institutional capture?
They represent the total victory of process over substance. Those maps are designed to show stakeholders, internal managers, HR, regulators, that the organization is conforming to certain ideological or bureaucratic frameworks. They signal virtue, they signal compliance.
But the irony is that all the time and energy spent perfecting those signals is time and energy not spent on the actual job.
Exactly. The more time they spend on these internal signaling mechanisms, the less time and fewer resources they have for the messy, difficult, unglamorous technical work of actual maintenance, training, and long-term planning. The substance of engineering becomes an annoyance because it actively interferes with the production of the necessary administrative image.
This environment must be just psychologically corrosive for the educated workers who are actually trying to do the technical jobs. Why would you even bother trying to become competent in a captured institution?
It creates a massive disincentive. It's a total breakdown of the social contract. For decades, the implicit promise was, get a good education, acquire specialized skills, and you'll achieve stability, professional respect, a reasonable life. Now, a lot of college-educated workers are realizing that the value they produce is being systematically siphoned off for some distant elite, whether it's crypto bros, real estate investors, or just massive corporate administrative teams. They're struggling to make rent, and meanwhile, they're being bombarded by social media images of people pretending to live these amazing lives with seemingly zero tangible effort.
So the worker sees that their competence doesn't actually guarantee stability, and their labor is just being extracted for someone else's benefit. That combination has to foster a complete lack of compulsion to become truly competent.
Absolutely. If you're going to be treated like a replaceable cog whose value is just extracted, why would you put in the long, painful hours it takes to achieve true, deep expertise? Why risk failure when success isn't really rewarded?
And you end up with a workforce that's technically capable, maybe, but lacks the drive?
Lacks the drive or the psychological safety net to strive for excellence. It's fascinating, though, because some sources note that while this technical competence and confidence have declined, the interpersonal atmosphere in the workplace has, in some ways, actually improved.
What does that trade-off look like? That's interesting.
It's a very strange social development. The observation is that newer workers often display significantly better attitudes. There's less cattiness, less workplace bullying, a greater willingness to cooperate and help each other out. They're generally more socially aware and collaborative.
So the workplace is nicer, but potentially less functional in a crisis.
That is the critical trade-off. The reduced competence shows up as lower confidence and a real unwillingness to take on complex or autonomous tasks without constant supervision, constant hand-holding. The institution failed to train them deeply, and that's coupled with this feeling that the work doesn't really matter anyway. So while their social skills are up, their hard skills, their capacity for autonomous problem-solving, technical leadership, risk-taking have significantly deteriorated.
And you need deep expertise to run a power grid, not just good collaborative skills.
You do. So that's the internal picture. Institutions losing their functional purpose, becoming obsessed with image and compliance, and creating a demoralized, less competent workforce. But if this structural decay is happening inside our most critical institutions, what mechanism keeps the entire public from seeing how bad the failure is? How does society maintain cohesion and faith in a system that's crumbling from within?
That is the crucial pivot, because the failure necessitates some kind of compensatory mechanism.
It does, and the sources all point to the same answer. the immense industrialized power of media to craft collective realities and identities. The external spectacle is designed to fill the internal void.
This immediately brings to mind the classic understanding of the nation-state, which, for decades everyone predicted it would vanish under the weight of global forces.
And yet it's proven to be incredibly resilient.
More than resilient.
We have to revisit Benedict Anderson's concept of the imagined community. The nation is, at its core, an imagined construct. Large populations can only believe they're a cohesive unit through a shared understanding.
And Anderson's theory was that mass media was the technology that made that possible.
The necessary technology. Historically, it was the rise of the novel and the newspaper, read simultaneously by people who would never meet. That's how the nation was imagined into being. And today, despite global media flows, the nation remains the nodal point of media discourse. It is the primary, most compelling frame we use to process complex geopolitical and social issues.
And globalization, paradoxically, seems to be reinforcing national identity rather than eroding it.
It absolutely does. Globalization is fundamentally two-sided. On one hand, yes, increasing mobility fosters cosmopolitanism among certain elites. But on the other hand, it triggers an escalating nationalism and stricter border controls in reaction to that.
And even huge transnational units like the EU.
You can analyze them not as the dissolution of national power, but as an extension of traditional imperialist logic, just on a larger scale.
Yeah.
They're seeking regional dominance while maintaining very distinct national identities internally.
And if the old, traditional sources of social glue, family, church, civic duty are weakening, this creates a vacuum.
A huge vacuum that demands to be filled. And this is a critical sociological link. The emergence of intense, culturally accented identity politics focused on religion or specific ethnic or national identities is often seen as a direct reaction to the collapse of that traditional social glue.
It's a search for meaning.
It's a search for meaning. When the nuclear family fragments, when religious attendance plummets, and when the core mission of our institutions fails, these new identities rise up as secular ideological substitutes. They fill the void left by what Durkheim called anomie, a lack of shared norms. And they provide a new basis for community and meaning, which connects directly back to our first point. Ideological compliance becomes more important than the messy functional project of building a competent society. The narrative replaces the function.
So if the present reality, this internal incompetence and decay, is just too jarring to face directly, the media offers a kind of phantom reality by manipulating the past. And this brings us to the immense, culturally significant role of nostalgia.
Nostalgia is the emotional infrastructure of that phantom homeland. It's so important to remember its original meaning. The word comes from the Greek nostos, meaning homecoming, and algos, meaning longing or pain.
It was a medical term.
It was a medical diagnosis. In the 18th century, Swiss physicians defined it as a severe, potentially fatal condition, especially among soldiers serving far from home. The symptoms were profound depression, anxiety, even physical decline that could result in death from longing.
So the longing for home was literally considered deadly. It wasn't just a sweet, sentimental feeling.
Not at all. It was a pathological homesickness. And when it transformed into a cultural concept, it became a longing not just for a distant place, but for a distant, inaccessible time. And this is where we have to bring in Svetlana Boym's essential distinction between two kinds of nostalgia. This determines whether the feeling is politically dangerous or socially reflective.
Let's start with the dangerous one, restorative nostalgia.
Restorative nostalgia is an active political project. It aims to literally reinstate a lost, perfected home. It treats the past not as a complex, messy history, but as an unchanging, pristine essence, a golden age.
Its narrative is that things used to be better, and we need to get back to that.
Exactly. Its view of history is one of decay and loss. The way things were before is always better. And the danger here is profound because it confuses the complex, flawed, actual home with this imaginary, simplified, perfected one. Boym argues this creates a phantom homeland, an idealized state that never really existed, for which people are often willing to die or kill. It rejects all nuance in favor of a singular, pure truth.
That desire to violently restore a fictionalized past, that sounds like the engine for a lot of radical political movements.
It's the engine that rejects irony and self-reflection. Now contrast that with reflective nostalgia.
Which is self-aware.
It's totally self-aware. It acknowledges that it is longing for something impossible. It stresses the longing, the pain, the algia, rather than demanding the seizure of the impossible home, the nostos. Reflective nostalgia is highly self-critical. It often uses humor or irony or fragmentation, and it maintains a critical distance from the past it's reconstructing.
It lets society reflect on the feeling of the past, rather than demanding that the past become present reality.
That's the perfect way to put it. And media often uses this reflective mode to create a sense of community pride without it devolving into fundamentalism. The Danish television series Chronic in Better Times is a fantastic case study in how a nation can perform this kind of community-making ritual.
This was a cultural phenomenon in Denmark, right?
Yeah, it was a true phenomenon. It was broadcast between 2000 and 2007, and it staged the foundation myth of the modern Danish welfare state, covering the period from 1950 to 1977. At its peak, the first 10 episodes averaged an audience of 2.5 to 3 million viewers.
That's nearly half the entire population.
Half the country. This wasn't just a TV show, it was a national conversation.
And the brilliance of the series is how it weaves the story of the welfare state directly into the story of the rise of mass media itself.
That's the central narrative device. The story of the modern welfare state is literally told through the import, production, and collective consumption of television sets. The main dramatic conflict is between the old patriarch, Kaj Holger, who runs a radio factory, and his imaginative son Eric, who sees the glorious future of the new medium, television.
So the past, radio and tradition, collides with the future, TV, and the welfare state through media technology.
Precisely. And the critical moment that convinces the traditionalist patriarch to finally embrace television is the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953.
The first true global mass media event.
Right. That shared, mediated experience was powerful enough to convert the old man. So the series celebrates the values of the welfare state, but its contemporary success rested on the viewing experience itself becoming a kind of nostalgic ritual. The audience performs a community we like to pretend we've had, often in that reflective, slightly ironic mode, just momentarily suspending disbelief about their current social fractures.
There's a scene where Eric, the son, is editing his own childhood home movies. And it perfectly illustrates this power of media to construct the past, not just document it.
That scene is so deeply metaphorical. Eric, after a defeat by his father, retrieves these old sepia-toned films from his childhood. He's walking down memory lane, but he has a pair of scissors in his hand, and he's preparing to literally cut his father out of the film every time he appears.
And his justification is chilling.
It's chillingly simple. He says his father was never there.
But the audience knows he was there.
We know he was. So as a viewer, we assume this triple role. First, we're onlookers to the childhood images. Second, we are witnesses to Eric's editing process, his personal reconstruction of the past. And this act highlights the constant tension between merely documenting the past and actively constructing it. Because we see the edit, we become highly sensitive to the nuances, to the multiple interpretations of history. The reflective past, unlike the restorative one, offers itself up to several readings, not just one simple truth.
And this sophisticated mechanism, this community-making ritual performed on our couches, is what can sustain cultural cohesion even as the technical foundations of the nation are, maybe crumbling.
Exactly. So we have this internal competence failure leading to an external need for a profound narrative. But that narrative moves beyond just nostalgia. When states start operating like corporations, the entire national identity becomes a manufactured product, a crucial tool of global soft and hard power.
This is the industrialization of image, or
Right.
what's called nation branding.
That's it. Nation-states are increasingly acting like sophisticated commercial enterprises. They see themselves as competitors in a global marketplace, all vying for investment, tourism, and diplomatic influence.
And the whole rhetoric changes. Traditional nationalism looks inward, it demands solidarity. Nation branding looks outward.
Completely outward. Traditional nationalism directed its rhetoric domestically to consolidate the population. Nation branding directs its entire sophisticated media apparatus internationally. It targets foreign investors, tourists, influential global opinion leaders. It's applying commercial marketing techniques to constitute the nation itself as a marketable commodity.
The temporal focus also changes dramatically. Nationalism is often steeped in history and tradition, but branding has to look forward.
History often becomes a liability. It's an embarrassment to be covered up, or at least heavily minimized. Nation branding prioritizes a forward-looking focus on potential opportunities. And this emphasis on the future creates what you could call a disjuncture of history, an active effort to erase previous negative or complex images of the past to present a fresh, economically viable product for global consumption.
Let's look at Estonia, a fascinating case study in this post-Soviet nation branding in the early 2000s.
Estonia recognized its vulnerability. It needed a clear, modern identity. So in connection with hosting the 2002 Eurovision Song Contest in Tallinn, they hired a top British PR agency, Interbrand, to create Brand Estonia.
And the whole strategy hinged on a rhetorical shift.
It did. They moved away from being defined as Baltic. That term was seen as limiting. It evoked instability, maybe too much Soviet history. So they decided to rebrand as Nordic, a term associated with stability, high technology, progressive governance, which they believed was more fitting and motivating for their desired future.
And who were they trying to reach with this new Nordic identity?
Primarily foreign direct investors and high-end tourists, but there was a critical secondary target: their own citizens. They had to convince the domestic population of the benefits of joining the EU and being globally competitive.
And to do this, they used the classic two-step flow model of communication.
Exactly. They targeted opinion leaders first, specifically journalists and influential commentators, through publications like in-flight magazines and the city paper. These outlets then relayed the desired image to the general public.
So the PR firm basically armed the journalists with the talking point.
Oh, absolutely. During Eurovision, national commentators were literally giving commentators notes designed to subtly inject the branding message. They were prompted to mention that Estonia had the highest internet-to-population ratio in Central and Eastern Europe, for instance. And even when skeptical commentators like Terry Wogan ridiculed the scripted fairy tale messages, the powerful, repetitive underlying message of Estonia as a tech-forward Nordic success just lingered. The branding worked by establishing the dominant frame of reference.
And shifting to India, we see that same branding mechanism applied on a massive scale to completely transform global perception.
The transformation of brand India has been colossal. It moved away from those traditional, sometimes Orientalist images focused on extreme poverty, exotic religious practices, the struggle for independence. The new narrative, the polished brand India, is entirely future-oriented.
So reporters suddenly stopped looking for slums and started looking for call centers in Bangalore.
Exactly. Or shopping malls in Gurgaon. The focus became the high-tech, booming economy. The core appeal of this new brand is market potential, not cultural heritage.
And that appeal is codified, right?
It's codified by the India Brand Equity Foundation into this powerful rhythmic sequence of descriptors. Fastest growing, free, market, democracy. This promotes the nation as having the largest knowledge workforce, being a vibrant democracy, and critically having a consumer base of 450 million middle-class citizens. That's the promise of unprecedented economic opportunity.
And this successful brand image is so powerful that it actively subordinates any contradictory reality that might pop up in the news.
That is the definition of successful image management. Even when you see reports detailing genuine structural problems like crumbling roads or the fact that hundreds of millions of Indians still live in extreme poverty, those facts are generally narrated in a subordinate relation to the dominant image of economic success.
So the problems are denied, but they're framed as temporary hurdles that this fastest growing free market will inevitably overcome.
That's it. The brand image manages the perception of failure. It contains it as a side note to the grand narrative of inevitable success.
This industrialization of image, it reveals a really intimate, financially entangled relationship between the state, the military, and the culture industries, especially when we look at global power projection. This is the unholy trinity: nation, Pentagon, and screen in the U.S. model.
Well, the U.S. government relies heavily on its vast culture industries, Hollywood, the gaming industry, news networks, as soft power to supplement its hard power of military force and economic sanctions.
The goal of public diplomacy.
Right. It's to build trust and influence foreign publics. But it has to maintain the illusion that U.S. popular culture is entirely independent of state direction. This allows the state to leverage Hollywood's immense industrial capacity to project a very specific image of American heroism and capability globally, while avoiding the label of direct government propaganda.
And this leads to the direct merger of military objectives and entertainment technology, the military entertainment complex.
The merging is stunningly open. Just take the anecdote from the 2003 Electronic Entertainment Exposition, E3, in Los Angeles. This was just 2 months after the invasion of Iraq began. U.S. Special Forces were there on the floor promoting America's Army.
Which was an electronic game.
A game designed specifically to attract new recruits and provide virtual experiences for vicarious insights into military life.
And was it effective as a recruiting tool?
Incredibly effective. An unprecedented return on public investment. It was backed by an initial public investment of $19 million, with millions more spent annually on updates. Within 5 years, it was one of the 10 most played online games in the world.
Wow.
And one study found that 30% of young people who viewed the military positively formed that view specifically from playing the game. It transformed recruitment from an appeal to duty into a branded entertainment experience.
What's the mechanism in these simulations that helps obscure the true horrific cost of conflict?
It's the aestheticization of violence and the creation of psychological distance. Games like America's Army explicitly forbid any role reversal modifications, so players can't experience the pain, death, or humiliation of the enemy.
It's sanitized.
Completely. And that sanitization is mirrored in modern conflict itself through virtual technologies, drones, satellites, precision targeting. For the operators, conflict appears safer, more clinical, more distant. It's what J. Robert Oppenheimer called the technically sweet quality of the atomic bomb, where the sheer technical feasibility of the deadly device diminishes the horror of its consequences.
So human casualties become abstracted. They're just blips on a screen or collateral damage in a virtual game. The science system starts referring only to itself.
Exactly. What begins as media reflecting reality gets systematically displaced by false or filtered information, and eventually the line between truth and lies becomes functionally indistinct. The military sign, the image of the heroic soldier, the clean precision strike, loses its correspondence with the real human cost. A century ago, the ratio was 8 U.S. soldiers killed for every 1 civilian in war. Today, that ratio is often reversed, yet the virtual portrayal sanitizes the destruction.
And the mainstream news media, which should be the accountability mechanism, often just acts as a willing echo chamber for these state narratives. We saw this leading up to the Iraq War.
The media failure around the 2003 Iraq invasion was a textbook example of institutional capture. Major U.S. news outlets were conspicuously biased in favor of war, despite widespread opposition. They acted often as a faithful stenographer with amnesia.
I remember CNN had a specific directive.
They did. They instructed presenters to mention September 11th every single time Afghan suffering was discussed, ensuring every casualty was linked back to a justified act of revenge. None of the 3 major commercial networks examined the humanitarian impact in the fortnight leading up to the invasion.
They weren't reporting on the case for war. They were participating in the sale of it.
They facilitated it through just incredibly credulous reporting. The administration sold the case for war based on flimsy evidence, relying on unverified claims from Iraqi defectors who were often funded by the U.S. government.
And journalists like Judith Miller at the New York Times ran with it.
Relied heavily on these anonymous, questionable sources, creating an effective echo chamber. The administration would leak a claim, the media would report it, and then the media would verify the claim by asking another member of the administration to corroborate the defector's intelligence.
And the most catastrophic result of this journalistic failure was the public's profound misperception of the war's human toll.
It's staggering. The media coverage dramatically obscured the grotesque human impact. Valid statistical work from top epidemiologists estimating the Iraqi death toll in the hundreds of thousands was systematically suppressed or ignored because it contradicted the narrative of a clean, swift war.
So what did the public believe?
As late as February 2007, 4 years into the war, the U.S. public's median estimate of Iraqi casualties was still shockingly low, below 10,000. That gap between a reality of hundreds of thousands dead and a public perception of under 10,000 illustrates the profound triumph of the administrative image over physical human reality. The media spectacle effectively outsourced the management of that structural debt.
And this industrialization of image is a global phenomenon. Let's look at how Russia handled the collapse of the Soviet Union, a moment of extreme social and political vacuum, and rebuilt its national identity.
The collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s led to hyperinflation, lawlessness, and a complete disillusionment with the democratic ideals that had been promised. This created a profound sociological vacuum and a collective desire for stability and prosperity over individual liberties. The new national narrative was designed specifically to fill that void by embracing imperial glory.
And it was recoded through ritual and media. How was power recoded when Vladimir Putin first came to power?
The transfer of power was deliberately staged to leverage deep cultural memory. It happened during the New Year celebration, the most important ancient Russian festival rooted in pre-Christian rituals of death and revival, symbolizing the transformation of time.
So by delivering his presidential greeting right before midnight,
simultaneously on all main television channels. He effectively recoded that right of the transformation of time into a right of the transformation of power. It served as this informal, culturally resonant inauguration that signaled a new era of stable, centralized authority.
And media, particularly cinema, was used immediately to popularize this new nationalist story, moving away from the chaotic 90s.
The new narrative explicitly rejected the democratic idealism of the 90s as a time of weakness and failure. Films like Brat, which means brother, and its sequel were instrumental. They introduced a simple, cool, hardened soldier hero named Danila Bagrov,
Who was portrayed as representing strength and truth.
even while participating in organized crime. His simple morality avenging those who have been wronged ushered in this potent nationalist story that marginalized the opposition. And this powerful, simplified, violent nationalism was then seamlessly integrated into state-sponsored political parties. It's a direct line from cultural product to political realignment.
And then state ceremonies and spectacles solidified this image of a reinstated superpower.
Absolutely. Inaugurations, the return of massive military parades, state-controlled television, they all beamed a clear, simple message of imperial glory and centralized competence, which was a sharp contrast to the chaotic incompetence of the 90s.
And even seemingly democratic exercises like the Name of Russia poll to find the greatest Russian ever served to solidify this official view.
It did. Whether the result was rigged or not, the outcome was highly illustrative. Military figures like Alexander Nevsky and Joseph Stalin scored exceptionally high, often above celebrated poets and writers like Pushkin and Dostoevsky.
So the outcome reinforced the state's intended view of history.
That the military caste rules Russia, that the nation's success is built on eastward expansion, and that the ultimate mission, Project Russia, is future-oriented, supported by substantial funds, including the very modern claim on the nano-world. It's an industrialized fantasy that projects strength onto the global stage while managing internal dissent through spectacular performance.
So we have come full circle. We're connecting the decay we saw in that engineering director's office to these global systems of image management. Internally, we see a hollow bureaucracy that substitutes ideological compliance and image for functional competence, leading to failure in critical systems.
And this internal failure, this vacuum left by the betrayal of the core mission, is then externally managed by a highly sophisticated, industrialized media spectacle. That spectacle, the nation branding, the soft power projection, the nostalgic myth-making it, transforms complex geopolitical struggles and deep structural deficits into simple, manageable narratives of competition and glory.
The core mechanism defining this civilizational winter, then, is the displacement of reality by performance. When competence fails, the illusion of authority has to take over.
Yes. Whether it's an engineering firm prioritizing a PR protocol over technical solutions during a blackout, or a superpower using billion-dollar gaming software to recruit youth while obscuring mass civilian casualties, the administrative image and the spectacular narrative become the real work.
And we are left with societies that are obsessed with these symbolic markers of success. The alignment maps, the national brands, the heroic film sagas.
All while the technical and social foundations they rest upon are crumbling beneath them. The ability of the spectacle to manage this deep structural debt, to persuade entire populations that the system is stable and the home is pristine, is the defining characteristic of this new era of engineered belief.